Boosting your TOEFL score is not that hard if you know how to do it. In my TOEFL, I scored 115, and this was mainly due to a few crucial points. Today, I want to break down the most important points for each section, and I also want to talk about the mistakes I made, what you can learn from that, and how you can avoid them. So let's go! Hey guys, I'm Juva. Today is all about how you can boost your TOEFL score in a smart and time-efficient manner. Let's start with the reading section. In reading, I scored 29, so I was quite happy with that. Tip number 1, timing. Timing is really important in the reading section because you only have a limited amount of time to read through all the texts and answer the questions. Therefore, I'd recommend first scanning through the text. I would not recommend reading the texts in detail. Instead, scan through the text, then have a look at the questions, and as soon as you know what the questions are about, go back to the text and have a look where you can find the answer for the questions. You will need some time to figure out what the correct answer for the question is, and you can only do that if you know what the question is about and if you have the time to analyze the text and look for the answer. Number 2, question types. It's really important that you know what types of questions can come up because this makes your life a lot easier. If you know what a question is about, you will know exactly what kind of answer you have to look for in the text. And this makes it much easier for you to find the correct answer, of course. So make sure that you know what the questions are about. Let's go on with the listening section. In listening, I scored 29, and this was really a huge surprise for me because I really had not expected that to happen. I don't live in an English-speaking environment, so I really did not expect to score that high. However, I'd practiced for the listening section in a certain way, and apparently that worked out. And that's also the first tip I want to talk about. Listen to stuff. As I said, I don't live in an English-speaking environment, so when studying for the TOEFL, I started thinking about how I can practice listening best. And what I did was I started listening to the news. Of course, the news is not a type of task that comes up in the TOEFL. However, I found listening to the news quite helpful because it gave me the opportunity to get accustomed to the American accent and simply to hear people talking in a natural speed. I also started listening to lectures on YouTube, and this was actually quite helpful because listening to lectures is a task that appears in the TOEFL, so this can really help you get used to listening to lectures. And if you do that, you automatically start thinking about what's the lecturer's main point, why does he give this example, what is the objective of the lecture, so you can get yourself into the mood that you need for the TOEFL listening section. The great thing about practicing listening this way is that it really doesn't cost you much time. You can do listening when you are cleaning your apartment, or when you are eating something, or simply when you are having a break. I'd recommend trying to incorporate that somehow in your daily schedule and also doing that regularly. I found that listening to lectures and the news and so on a regular basis enabled me to get used to hearing people talking. It also made it easier for me to understand the content of what people were talking about and to pose the right questions. Tip number 2, know the types of listening material that comes up in the listening section. You should know that there are conversations and there are lectures, and listening to a conversation is very different from listening to a lecture. For instance, when you're listening to a conversation, let's say between a student and a professor, you may be asked what the student wants the professor to do, or vice versa, or why the student goes to see the professor. And this is very different from listening to a lecture, where you may be asked questions about what the lecture is mainly about, or why the professor explains something in a specific way. So knowing the type of listening material that can come up will make your life much easier because you will already know what you're confronted confronted with, and you will not be surprised, and your mind will be set on, okay, this is a conversation and I perhaps should listen for why the student goes to see the professor. Or you think, okay, this is a lecture, perhaps a question could be about what the main point of the lecture is. So knowing the type of task also gives you a certain direction. Tip number 3. Question types. Make sure you know the types of questions that can come up in the listening section. This will make your life a lot easier, because if you know the types of questions that can come up, you will know what to listen for. And even better, you may even be able to anticipate what question will be asked about a specific conversation or lecture you have heard. For example, if you know that when listening to a lecture there may be a question about the main point of the lecturer, you will start to listen for that main point in the lecture. Your brain is going to filter out the information that is important. So knowing the questions that can come up in the listening section before you go into the test is really important. Let's go on with the speaking section. In the speaking section, I scored 27, so obviously this was my weakest section. I first want to talk about how I practiced for the section and what I think went well, and then what mistake I made and how you can avoid that. Tip number 1, again, make sure you know the types of questions that can come up. In the speaking section, there will be different types of questions for you, and each task demands something different from you. For example, in one task you have to express your opinion about a specific topic, in another you have to talk about the opinion of somebody else, and there is also a task where you have to speak about the lecture. So as you can see, there are different tasks and each task demands something different from you, so you should be prepared for that. Tip number 2, use a template. Guys, I think this is really important because it makes your life so much easier. When studying for the speaking section, I created a template, and this made it much easier for me to answer the questions in the speaking part. I'd recommend creating a template by yourself when studying. Of course, you can also download them online. You can find a lot of these templates online. However, if you do that, I'd highly recommend changing the templates in a manner that it fits your manner of speaking, for 2 reasons. The first reason is, if you change the expressions in the template such that it fits your manner of speaking, you're engaging with the material, and this will make it much easier for you to memorize the speaking templates because you wrote the template by yourself and you use expressions that you also normally use. And the second thing is, you will feel much more comfortable if you use a template that corresponds to your manner of speaking. Tip number 3, timing. That's the part where I messed up a bit. In the speaking section, you only have a limited amount of time to prepare your answers and to speak. What happened was, in the first half of my speaking time, I went way too much into detail, and in the second half, I really had to speed up to include all the necessary information that was left. So what I did was, I skipped a few points and I spoke really fast. That must have sounded pretty weird. So my key message is, keep it short and concise, include all the necessary information but not more, and practice at home under time pressure. Learn from my mistakes and score higher. Let's go on with writing. I scored 30 in writing, and I've already been talking a lot about writing on this channel, so I will keep it short here. I'm just gonna repeat my most important tips. And the first one is structure. Make sure that you use a specific structure in your essays. Use paragraphs. And this brings us to tip number 2. Use templates for your essays. If you use templates for your essays, this makes it much easier for you to write in a logical and coherent way, because you know how an essay must be structured, and it also makes your life easier because when writing the essay you won't have to think about what to write because you already know how to start your sentences. And last but not least, tip number 3, language. The writing section is the perfect opportunity to show off your language skills. Use if conditionals, use more complex sentence structures, use a broad range of vocabulary, do paraphrasing, and so on. Let's get to the last point, the TOEFL Home Edition. If you do the TOEFL Home Edition, make sure that you know how the TOEFL Home Edition works, make sure that you know when your scheduled date is, make sure that you are punctual, make sure that you know the rules, because all that will give you the confidence you need to succeed on the TOEFL. That's it for today. These are my top tips for scoring 115 and more. I hope this helps you. If you have more tips, put them in the comments below. See you next time.